A gift is the first step for corruption.
50% of Singaporeans feel that inequality has actually worsened.
The local population feel that their places are being taken up by immigrants, but you have to attract talent.
If we allow enclaves of the rich to emerge, for a city-state like Singapore, this would be especially disastrous.
When Singapore separated from Malaysia on August 9th, 1965, it became one of the world's last city-states. Like the grand city-states of old, these modern outliers stay relevant to the world by being open.
As a small city-state, you must be able to trade, you must be able to do business, you have to be porous.
But this comes with the trade-offs of welcoming wealth, ideas, and immigrants like me.
My mum is a Singaporean Chinese, and my dad was originally from England. But that makes it a little bit hard for people to pinpoint exactly what my identity is. And I guess in many ways, Singapore is exactly the same. It's constantly grappling with its duality of being a global city and a nation state.
How do you create a society that is both outward-looking but is also rooted in its own values? And that is the great challenge.
Juggling the tensions of being a global city-state could just be Singapore's greatest balancing act.
At the port of Singapore, millions of containers are transferred between ships, connecting global trade. Its exceptional efficiency has made it the world's leading transshipment hub.
The Port of Singapore is extraordinarily well run. They couldn't afford to have an inefficient port because, hey, if I want an inefficient port, there's plenty of other places I can go. When you're small, you got to be better. And if you're a city-state, you're going to have to be very efficient at what you do.
Thanks to Singapore's strategic position as a global trade hub, we get access to produce from all around the world. But there is a catch. When there are global disruptions and supply chain issues, we really feel the pinch here.
Relying too much on one specialty can make a city-state vulnerable. How do city-states stay relevant in more ways than one? In southern France, on its border with Italy, lies the Principality of Monaco. It's a tiny city-state, just 2 square kilometers, but it's become a magnet for wealth from around the world.
The Casino de Monte Carlo has been at the heart of Monaco's economy since 1863. By attracting wealthy visitors and gamblers from all across Europe, the casino was able to turn Monaco from a struggling principality to a thriving, prosperous destination.
But does Monaco still depend on gaming and luxury tourism? To better understand Monaco's economy, I caught up with their Minister of Finance.
Minister Chiappori, when we talk about Monaco, a lot of us think of the casino and the Grand Prix, but how much of Monaco's economy is actually driven by these 2 industries?
Not much, actually. Monaco has a very diversified economy. Financial activities, banks, wealth management, even industrial activities. We used to have pharmaceuticals, we have a lot of research, development. The key thing to understand Monaco's economy is we want to maximize value added per square meter. Any small place is exploited in the most efficient way.
Monaco's GDP has nearly doubled in the last decade. Its approach reminds me of how Singapore diversified its economy to maximize its limited land. Beyond trade and logistics, Singapore has built up world-class industries in advanced manufacturing, technology, and financial services. Singapore's rise as a financial center mirrors how historic city-states gained influence through finance. Located in northern Italy, Venice was once an island republic that endured over 1,000 years. Venetian author and historian Alessandro Marzamagno shares how Venice became the gold standard of financial centers by minting the Venetian ducat.
It was the first gold coin in the whole history of the Venetian state. It became the most important coin for all Europe towards the Middle East. Coins were not just a piece of silver or a piece of gold, were the symbol of the state, and so people had trust in them. And so they contributed to create this financial system.
So what contributed to the rise of Venice as a financial hub?
In Rialto, the financial heart of Venice. You have to imagine a sort of place full of people, trader people, bankers. You have insurance, you have banks and exchanges, you know. And the people came there to sell and to buy from all around all Europe.
So for Venice, finance emerged very naturally from trade. For Singapore, it was a very different story.
Singapore is one of the top financial centers in the world, and its financial sector here employs over 200,000 people, including my husband. But Singapore wasn't always a financial hub. It started as a center for entrepot trade, where merchants and middlemen, like the ones you see behind me, would import goods and store them in their warehouses. They would then go on to export those goods to other markets. All the trade along the Singapore River attracted moneylenders and bankers, but this alone didn't make Singapore a world-class financial hub. No, the Singapore government took deliberate steps to support the financial sector.
It was then Dr. Goh Keng Swee who decided, under the counsel of Albert Maximus from the United Nations, that Singapore was well positioned to be a financial hub.
Over 6 decades, various key milestones have paved the way for Singapore to be ranked among the world's top financial centers. But being a global financial hub does have its trade-offs.
It is a bit unfortunate that many global financial centers across the world also experience high levels of inequality. When the financial center takes root, financial elites and professionals enter the city. Now, as the financial sector grows and attracts more investors, high net worth individuals will not only bring their capital to the city, they will also relocate to the city.
Singapore is home to a rising number of billionaires and ultra-high net worth individuals with assets exceeding $30 million. To understand what's attracting the super rich to Singapore, I speak to Ken Chu. He's an advisor to a family office. It's an organization set up to manage and invest the generational wealth of an ultra-wealthy family. Ken works for a billionaire who made his fortune in East Asia.
Hi, Kelly. So this is our tea room.
Nice.
We have for Chinese tea collection.
So Ken, what do you think it is about Singapore that attracts these ultra-high net worth individuals to come here, park their money here, and really develop?
Singapore is fortunate as it's being deemed as a safe place. It's efficient and it's international. Since the last 6 years, the world being a more volatile place compared to before. We have new wars, new disease outbreaks, new geopolitical tensions. People are looking for a safe harbor.
But how does more apparent wealth affect Singapore society? Dr. Nathan Peng is a policy expert who studies inequality in Singapore.
We come across certain instances of ostentatious or flashy consumption. I think some Singaporeans might get reminded about inequality and their position in society and why is it that I am unable to afford some of these luxuries. The number of luxury cars in Singapore as a percentage of the total number of cars is actually rising in recent years.
Do you think that there is a greater perception of inequality here then?
From macroeconomic numbers that we measure with things like income ratios, Gini coefficients, since World War II, inequality in Singapore has been relatively stable. But that said, and you see this from opinion polls done by Access Singapore, where about 50% of Singaporeans feel that in the last 10 years, inequality has actually worsened.
So then what are the risks involved of that felt inequality?
So I think our former Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong said in 2018 that if left unaddressed, politics will turn vicious, society will fracture, and the country will wither.
A city-state's government can curb inequality by taxing the ultra-wealthy and limiting how much they influence politics. This was underscored recently when a Singaporean minister was convicted for accepting gifts from a wealthy businessman and sentenced to 12 months in prison. Like Singapore, Venice was watchful of corruption. Venetian author and historian Alberto Tosofei says strict rules kept its leaders accountable, and this helped the Republic to endure for centuries.
The Doge's palace was the heart of a city-state, political and administrative heart. The whole of a major council shows the portraits of the first 76 Doges of the Republic among the 120 who ruled the city-state during its history.
But there is one which has been covered up with a black veil. What happened there?
Marin Falier searched to become the sole ruler of a town. He was discovered, beheaded, and buried with his head between his legs. No place for the man who betrayed the Republic.
So it seems like there was a very harsh stance on corruption or using your power for personal gain.
The Doge, they couldn't accept gifts. A gift is the first step for corruption. And the Doge could not move a step without being controlled. The Doge was submitted to a trial after his death. There was a trial on the corpse and all his living had.
So after you've died,
Yeah.
you go through a trial,
Yeah.
and it's your family members and descendants that then suffer the consequences of your poor choices whilst you were ruling.
That's it.
Wow. That seems really harsh. Learning about how Venice was like back in the days of being a city-state was really quite remarkable. They knew that they had to make sure that there was no corruption whatsoever amongst its ministers, even amongst the top dog or the top doge, simply because if they allowed it to happen, even something as small as a gift exchange, they knew that that would sow the seeds for something much, much bigger.
Despite its checks and balances, corruption and nepotism crept into the Venetian state as a few powerful merchant families came to dominate both commerce and politics.
Now, our lessons from Renaissance Italy has shown us that corruption can lead to the decline of city-states. If the government becomes corrupt, it is captured by the financial elite. It could lead to a broad loss of trust. It could lead to political decay. For a small city-state, there may be no coming back from this kind of decline.
It's fascinating to see models of Singapore and go and find where your house is. It just helps you appreciate everything that gets done to make sure that Singapore is developed and utilized in a great and efficient manner.
Singapore is very unique because we're not just a city, we're also a country and an island. And so we have to find ways to fit all the different needs into 735 square kilometers of land. What we have to do is to strike a balance that enables us to plan for a Singapore where we will have a vibrant economy, we will have a society that's very inclusive, and we will also have nature and heritage as well to make our city a very lovable and livable one.
Urban planners in Singapore have long faced the challenge of balancing livability and growth.
Singapore, expanding industrially, is growing all the time.
In the 1960s, the city faced a housing crisis due to overcrowding and poor living conditions. So the government rehoused Singaporeans in high-density public flats. 80% of Singaporeans came to live in public housing by the 1980s. Today's housing challenge is keeping homes affordable as prices rise due to limited land, population growth, and high demand from local and foreign buyers.
So I think the Singapore government has tried to insulate the Singapore population from some of these effects. For example, rising housing prices by creating two housing markets, one with public housing for 80% of Singaporeans, where Singaporeans get relatively cheaper access to housing, and then the private housing market for the remainder of the population and also foreigners.
Over here, we've got public housing, behind us some private condominiums, and across the road, landed property as well. How does this reflect the broader social fabric here in Singapore?
So I think across Singapore, you see the exact same patterns replicated across different neighborhoods. And that's largely a result of our policy to have different housing types mixing in the same neighborhood to kind of ensure a mixing of different income groups and the prevention of enclaves, right, from forming here in Singapore.
Singapore is about the only global city and financial hub that is building public housing in the city center. Now, imagine if we were a little bit like the other financial hubs, like Hong Kong or New York, where most of the prime locations are dominated by private real estate developers, private condominiums, and only high-income individuals could purchase houses in these areas. If we allow enclaves of private estates and the rich to emerge, that could result in a broader decline in our societal order and trust. And for a city-state like Singapore, this would be especially disastrous.
Affordable housing is a major challenge in Monaco, where extreme land scarcity and high property prices surpass those of Singapore. The influx of wealthy residents further drives up demand and prices.
Monaco has some of the priciest real estate in the world. The penthouse at the Odeon Towers was sold for just over $400 million US. The project caters to the world's elite with swimming pools, private spas, and 24/7 concierge access. Bonjour, monsieur.
Bonjour, madame.
But the Odeon Tower doesn't just contain luxury apartments. It includes many state-owned apartments reserved for Monegasque citizens. Its developer, Group Marzocco, a leading luxury real estate company, has developed other projects with a mix of private and public flats.
These state-owned apartments don't just reside in public housing estates, but they can also be featured within ultra-luxe apartment buildings like this one.
Mixing apartment types maximizes land, but most public and private housing remains separate.
The balance between private and public housing that's decided at the government level, the total real estate in Monaco is sort of harmonious. Every Monaco citizen has a right to housing, and if they cannot afford one, it will be given by the government with very large subsidies.
Currently, Monaco has over 3,000 state-owned apartments set aside for its Monegasque citizens. Now, it doesn't seem like a lot until you remember that there are only about 10,000 Monegasque nationals in total.
Bonjour. Bonjour. Nice to meet you.
Mrs. Karen Meyer was originally from Bolivia, but gained Monegasque citizenship through marriage to her late husband. She has 2 children and a new husband who is French.
I think my first impressions of meeting a Monegasque family was, wow, what an amazing place to stay. It is a stunning apartment, and I think to have public housing that looks and feels very premium is quite a luxury. But it's obviously a way of taking care of the Monegasques.
So Karen, how much would you pay for a place like this?
Aujourd'hui, mon logement me coûte 1 560 € exactement, par mois. Personnellement, si je n'étais pas monégasque, je ne pourrais pas me loger dans un appartement de cette taille. Et encore moins à Monaco, au prix du logement actuel ici. Je pense comme gouvernement que les nationaux s'y retrouvent dans ces 2 km² à avoir ces avantages-là.
Over 60% of Monegasque citizens live in public housing, and the city is building more state-owned apartments to house 75% of Monegasques by 2034. But citizens of prosperous city-states don't just expect their homes to be affordable. They want their homes to be green and well-connected too. And that takes planning. I'm meeting Nicholas Lee, a designer from the Urban Redevelopment Authority. He's showing me a tool they use to plan Singapore's future cityscape.
ePlanner is a very powerful platform that allows us to integrate over 200 data sets of information that's useful for planning and urban design. It's almost like playing SimCity. With a click of a button, it actually will generate accurate and realistic development simulations that are in accordance with the master plan.
So Nicholas showed me the ePlanner tool, which also blew my mind, just because it creates a replica of Singapore.
So every tree has been surveyed and mapped out, so this is quite an accurate depiction of the trees that are on site.
And what it does is it helps you to scope and also to assess building planning, air flows, traffic flows, people flows. Just seeing how they're utilizing technology is remarkable.
One plan that's come to life in Singapore is the new Bidadari estate. The area was a cemetery, but has been resurrected as a housing estate with a public park at its core. Professor Cheong Kun Hien oversaw the planning and redesign of Bidadari when she was the chief of the Housing and Development Board.
Bidadari actually is a reflection of the challenges we have in planning Singapore. We had to put in a new town, which is highly dense, into quite a small space. So we started by asking, so what is Bidadari about? A lot of people think that it's a cemetery, but if you go back in history, Bidadari actually had a beautiful alcove garden here many decades ago. So the idea of putting in a regional park became the central theme of this master plan. I think people need greening, they need parks, especially in a very dense city, because it provides respite and a getaway feeling for relaxation and recreation.
The Bidadari project makes room for green, open spaces through efficient use of land. The lake isn't just for recreation. It collects and drains stormwater to prevent floods. The housing blocks are densely packed, yet positioned to maximize wind flow, reducing urban heat and keeping residents comfortable.
When we developed Bidadari, I think many of the bird watchers were very concerned that the birds would disappear. So what we did was we planned the park very carefully, and we worked with Nature Society and the bird watchers and made sure that we actually preserve many of the mature trees that are here. So as a result, the birds came back, and so did the bird watchers. We need to provide housing, which means we need to use up land. But people who love nature do not like the fact that a lot of the greenery may have to be removed. So again, it's about bringing stakeholders together to try to understand these tension points and come to some conclusion where we can strike a good balancing act.
I think Singaporeans are a tricky bunch to please. You know, we want the best of everything. You're never going to please everybody. But I think the government's doing a pretty good job of trying to check all the boxes.
If you look at the most beautiful urban landscapes in the world, a lot of them were city-states because they had to be good at what they did. If you have limited land, how do you use it efficiently? And I think Singapore's done a great job of that by keeping open space. You know, when you're in Singapore, you don't feel the claustrophobia that you would feel, for instance, in a big city.
Singapore is a nation state, but as Singapore innovates, as Singapore moves upwards in the value chain, it needs talents.
A city-state has to compete on brains and talent and good administration.
This is where the lawyers used to stay.
Alberto says talented inventors were drawn to Venice because it upheld the rule of law.
A representation of Venice is justice.
In 1474, the Republic of Venice became one of the first to introduce patent laws, protecting inventors' rights to profit from their ideas. This attracted people to innovate in the city.
Venice invented a lot of stuff. Invented the first assembly line, invented the mirror. A small Venetian mirror with a silver frame had the same value of 3 paintings of Raphael. Venice invented many things related to print, to the books. It was the capital of books during the 16th century.
As a publishing center, Venice offered innovators and explorers a platform to share their ideas with the world. The Marciana Library has preserved a treasure trove of historic books published in Venice.
We have here the first geographical treaty. The author, Ramusio, was a geographer. You could know all the known world of that time. Or you can also know the gastronomy. The author was the cook of the Pope, and he wrote one of the first, the most important kitchen book of the 16th century.
The original cookbook. I love it.
Innovation and creativity are the best instrument to go over time, you know, and to give to the state something, a wellness to people who live in the state, and also something to give as an heritage to the world.
So I think it's quite remarkable that patent laws were around even back then. They knew that respecting the innovation and the creator of that innovation was a key to attracting talent. And I think Singapore wants to attract that same level of talent in the same way that Venice did all those years ago.
In Singapore, universities are magnets for global talent. At the NUS School of Medicine, I meet Professor Dean Ho. He's an award-winning scientist from America who joined the university in 2018.
All right, Kelly, we're going to put this wearable on you, and then after that, we're going to slowly ramp up the pace, and with the data that we get, we're going to start the process of making a digital twin of you to see how to best personalize your treatment.
Combining his expertise in AI and bioengineering, Prof. Dean has helped establish an institute in the new field of digital medicine.
And this digital twin tells us what dose or difficulty that will net them the highest level of performance improvement.
You could have gone anywhere in the world, but you chose Singapore. Why is that?
For me, on the professional side, I really wanted to be part of an ecosystem where the path to getting these innovations to patients is accelerated. Every day we get there quicker, lives are saved. At the same time, I also wanted to be part of a community that was welcoming, that would support and embrace my family as well, being that I would be able to love coming to work every day and actually viewing my colleagues as close friends and family. And when you look at wrapping all of these together, I knew Singapore was a place where both personally and professionally, we would be happy, that I would be happy. Kopioko song. 2.
Prof. Dean's work goes beyond the lab and office. He surveys different neighborhoods to understand people's diets and lifestyles.
But when I'm at an HDB exercise facility, I get met with smiles and waves as I'm doing, quick pull-ups, but also seeing the community out there looking after themselves is motivating, it's welcoming, and it actually just makes my morning. It's really fun.
Prof. Dean's ability, desire, and willingness to integrate himself into a heartland society is really important when it comes to foreign talent coming to Singapore. When I moved to Singapore, my parents were very, very explicit with, we are not here as expats, we are here living as locals. And I feel like Prof. Dean has done exactly the same thing.
As a global city-state, you have to attract talents. You have to let talents come in. And this is good for Singapore. But at some points, this creates tensions because the local population feel that their places are being taken up by immigrants. So this is a constant challenge for a nation-state that is also a global city-state.
Singapore's foreign workforce makes up about 1 in 4 people in the city-state. As of June 2024, there were over 1.5 million foreign workers. They are issued different work passes based on their skill levels. At the Ministry of Manpower, I meet Kenny Tan. As Deputy Secretary, he says his job is to unleash the potential of Singapore's workforce.
Am I in danger of losing my job to a foreigner? Like, I feel that's maybe a question that a lot of Singaporeans might have.
It's not a zero-sum game between foreigners and local workers, but rather it's about growing the economic pie and creating a bigger slice for Singaporeans. That translates to more jobs for Singaporeans, not less.
So then, DS, where do you see global talent competing with Singaporean talent there?
We must recognize that at the individual level in the workplace, global talent does compete with a Singaporean talent. And some people may feel anxious about this. But I think the way to deal with this is how can we support Singaporeans to compete strongly and fairly. Over the next 5 years, we are setting aside 10 billion to empower all Singaporeans to take charge of their career health, upskill, and seize new opportunities in the future economy. Secondly, I think it's also important that we ensure a level playing field. So the qualifying salaries for the employment pass and S-pass holders, we peg these salaries to the wages of the top 1/3 of the Singaporean workforce. So this ensures that the foreign professionals who come in are of high quality and don't come in to undercut local wages. So dealing with competition is tough, we recognize that. But Singaporeans, us too, we have a part to play. We've got to work hard, upskill, and meet the competition head on.
The city-state of Monaco depends even more heavily on foreign talent than Singapore does.
Each weekday, tens of thousands of workers commute into Monaco from neighboring France and Italy, outnumbering the residents that live here in this small city-state.
Total population is about 40,000. We've got between 50 and 60,000 people moving into Monaco in the morning and leaving Monaco in the evening.
With 75% of Monaco's residents already foreign nationals, the daily influx makes the workforce 90% foreign. Karen works at the Monegasque Sanitation Company, which employs about 300 people, many from abroad.
Monégasque pour le coup, mais il y a beaucoup de Comoriens, beaucoup de Portugais, beaucoup d'Italiens, beaucoup de Français. Je rencontre beaucoup, beaucoup des Européens. Moi, personnellement, à mon travail, on est, je sais pas beaucoup de Monégasques.
Monegasques make up just 10% of the workforce and less than 25% of the resident population.
Most of the people are from out of town. That's okay, but I guess the trade-off is that you have to accept that as a Monegasque, you are the minority. You would feel quite outnumbered, I feel. In Singapore, you don't get that sense as much, simply because you don't have that sort of flooding into Singapore. So whilst we talk about Singapore having a lot of foreign talent, we're still the majority.
Local citizens may feel that I don't want to have too many short-term immigrants in my midst. Then when you bring in a lot of these talents and those born, bred and raised in Singapore becomes smaller and smaller, it will affect, I guess, our social cohesion and what it means to define our identity as Singaporeans.
How do you create a society that is both outward-looking and tolerant, but is also rooted in its own values? And that is the great challenge that any city-state or any society faces.
I love my neighborhood of Katong and Juche. It really is a slice of multicultural Singapore. And over the years, the various migrant communities have contributed to the ever-changing landscape. More recently, gentrification has brought in hip cafes, expats, and transnational residents like myself.
But in a city-state that's so diverse and dynamic, it's hard to find shared values beyond our multiculturalism.
I think multiracialism is a defining value for Singapore because it is the very reason why there is a Singapore as an independent and sovereign state.
Singapore and any city-state has to be very, very aware of its cultural heritage and its sense of uniqueness. If you look like a center anywhere else, you lose that little bit of advantage that you might have had. That's a danger that city-states face all the time. What are they about? What's their culture?
Unlike Singapore, in the other modern city-states, citizens are united by a shared religion. Their citizens are also rooted in centuries-old institutions. While the Vatican City has been an independent city-state for less than 100 years, its unbroken line of popes has led the Catholic Church for about 2,000 years.
I think there is a lot of love for people around the world for the Pope. So even if you are not a citizen of the Vatican City itself, it's almost like you feel like you're home.
So we've walked for 1,000 kilometers in 2 months, specifically to come to Rome.
The Vatican City, I mean, it's such a remarkable place, really, and the extraordinary basilica that's behind us.
It's a symbol of peace on earth. All we want to be in peace in Ukraine.
Every Sunday, people gather in St. Peter's Square to hear the Pope deliver his noontime Angelus prayer and message.
Cari fratelli e sorelle, buona domenica.
Personally, as a Catholic, I think coming here to the Vatican and being a part of the Angelus was quite an emotional experience. I think I expected the message from the Vatican to be one which was a lot more religious, but the one that I received was actually one of love and peace, regardless of religion.
Tacciano le armi, si dia spazio al diavolo. Preghiamo per la martoriata Ucraina, la Palestina, Israele, Myanmar, South Sudan.
Offering a universal message of peace helps the Vatican remain relevant, not just to Catholics, but to the world. It uses its moral authority to address global crises like the refugee crisis and climate change.
We try to keep that universal dimension. In this office, I think we have 25, 26 different nationalities. I come from England, from Liverpool. The Holy Father is an Argentinian Jesuit, a member of an international order.
Today's Vatican embraces the world. Unlike centuries ago, when it was intolerant of people of other faiths, even supporting crusades against Muslim forces. In contrast, Venice welcomed foreigners that could contribute to the economy.
It was a place where, whether you were Muslim or Jewish, you could go there, and, you know, the Venetians cared about one thing. It was called money.
So now we have some of the most precious books of the history of publishing. 3 religious books from different religions. And the first Talmud was published in Venice. Venice became the hub of Hebrew pressing. Then we have a religious Armenian book. In Venice was published the first Armenian book ever. And then we have the first translation of the Holy Quran in Italian.
Why was it that Venice was publishing books from different religions?
In the 16th century, Venice was a city of foreigners. People from all over Europe and Middle East was able to work with books in different languages.
Venice profited from foreign business networks, but managed diversity by keeping communities separate. For example, they confined the Jewish population to this area, which gave rise to the term ghetto.
In 1516, there was a war outside Venice. Many Jews came to Venice to escape the enemies. The government of Venice said, okay, we give you a place, but a place where you stay closed.
At its peak, up to 5,000 residents lived in the ghetto. But the state restricted how openly Jews could worship and even controlled the kinds of jobs they could do.
So they were mainly bankers, magicians, doctors, you know? And for instance, William Shakespeare wrote The Merchant of Venice, and where we can spot a Jewish banker and a Christian banker working together, but separating during the night because the Jewish one had to come back here and sleep here and not in the rest of the city.
Were they allowed to intermingle socially? Were they allowed to get married, for example?
No. Marriage between Christians and Jewish were forbidden.
Venice enforced separation, but Singapore imposes social integration. Racial enclaves persisted from the colonial era into independence, with public housing blocks often dominated by single ethnic groups. To bridge these divides, the government introduced racial quotas in public housing in 1989. Dr. Leong Chan Hung researches social cohesion in Singapore. He shares with me the rationale for the ethnic integration policy.
The goal is to ensure that there will not be pure ethnic enclaves. Every block and every neighborhood, you would have Chinese, the Malays, the Indians, and the ethnic others. You have the opportunity to come in contact and meet people who are different, which is important to establishing a common understanding of who we are as Singaporean as a multiracial, multicultural society.
In Singapore's public housing estates, there are also quotas for non-citizens and permanent residents. It's a way to maintain social harmony as the immigrant population grows.
In general, having shared spaces, community spaces really help.
When I first moved to Singapore, one of the first things that my dad and I did was actually seek out a space that we could go and do karate together. And one of the places was actually in a community center. And we found some great friends that we got on well with, and we found that sport really helped to bond us within that community.
Community centers, by and large, they have the mandate to bring people together, to create opportunities for interactions.
While state-run community centers are purpose-built for gathering, Dr. Leong says social integration often unfolds naturally in shared, everyday spaces.
Hello.
Hello. Green and yellow.
Okay, yellow here.
Yellow here.
Green there. Green there. Good.
Take this open field. On Sundays, immigrants and locals gather not by policy, but through the shared love of football.
Here on Sunday is rather diverse. The bulk of it are people from Singapore. We've got guys from Malaysia like myself. There are some guys from India, some guys from Bangladesh. There's a Taiwanese kid. We've got the guys from Myanmar who join us on and off.
I think when you pull people with the same interests, there's already a bond or respect or just camaraderie that we are all trying to, do things together.
These organic kind of interactions really help to build that confidence and understanding of each other.
What more needs to be done?
You could also consider encouraging more permanent residents or non-residents to study in the local schools rather than international schools.
Okay, so today's topic, celebrating diversity with gratitude. We're gonna play a game. It's gonna be blow, wind, blow. Blows those who have friends from different races, religions, or nationalities. So what's your race?
I'm an Indian.
So Nafa is from what race?
Malay. Malay.
Malay. Is that right, Nafa? Ah. Jongho?
Korean.
Korean?
Australian.
What is the nationality of Oliver?
So-called British. England, not British.
This was the first time I've been able to sit and witness what class is like for my daughter.
Sienna?
I am Malaysian.
Malaysian?
What?
To her, she is a quarter Singaporean,
a quarter English, and half Malaysian. I enrolled Sienna in Tanjong Katong Primary School for it is an exceptionally diverse school, and I never wanted Sienna to feel that she was different and out of place.
Tanjong Katong Primary School was actually formed in 2001, and it was an amalgamation of 3 different schools. And in our early years, we actually had this reputation of being a mini United Nations. Because in 2007, our school actually attracted students from 35 different nationalities. Things have changed a little, but we still have a very diverse nationality even until this day.
Where are some of your classmates from?
I have classmates from Vietnam, Malaysia, Australia, Indonesia, and I even have some from India.
Being a global citizen means you're a citizen of the world, you have a global outlook, and you can form relationships from international friends.
So then what makes you Singaporean?
I personally think that most Singaporeans have respect for other people, and we are able to accept what their daily life is like and how they eat, what is life like in their other countries. Singapore is friends with everyone, so we are able to live in peace and harmony.
I think the notion of respect is something that's highly ingrained here at TKP. I think it just sets a really good framework and foundation for the future. And you look at them and you go, yeah, I think Singapore's in good hands, especially if they're all able to just come together in this way and set all differences aside, all preferences aside, and just be happy.
I think the openness means that you have to be exposed to a whole host of ideas. Some of them good, you learn new things, but some of them can influence you in negative ways.
I think the key to managing it is, again, social cohesion.
The key balancing act for a city-state is how do I stay open and still keep my identity and some sense of security? And it's a very difficult thing to accomplish. And you know, Singapore has many issues, of course, but I can't think of any place on the planet that's done a better job.